Hi everyone, welcome to Living Your Best Life with Eddie Stone, founder and CEO of Touchstone Essentials. Hello Eddie,
Hello, Perry. Hi, everyone.
how are you today?
I am doing fantastic. I know it's morning for you, but it's evening here.
Mhm.
And so it's Monday the 7th. And so the first full week of the new year, which has me excited. I got up early and have had a ton of energy for the day and just excited about where we're going and what we're doing.
That's great. Okay, today Eddie, what will we discuss about?
Well, on the back half of the call, I want to talk a little bit about Lyme disease. Lyme's disease is really in the United States and really parts of Europe and in Canada, it's really become a real sort of epidemic issue. I think the numbers from 2017 are going to shape up to be approximately a little over 400,000 new diagnosed cases just in the U.S. And Lyme's has some challenges in part because the symptoms almost mirror when a person has the flu. So it's sort of those same types of symptoms. And I know we've spoke a little bit about Lyme's before, but the real crisis for a lot of people is they don't get diagnosed properly because it does look like the flu to the doctor, right? Nothing we can really blame there. It's just a fact of the situation. So by the time they realize it's Lyme's disease, it's really set into their bodies. I mean, the disease can even get into the skeletal system, not just the muscles and not just soft tissues in the bloodstream. So once it's there and sort of embeds itself into your body, incredibly difficult with very unfortunate symptoms. So we'll finish a little bit on that for the show. But I thought I would dedicate the first part of the show to go back and revisit our discussion last week, talking about the synthetic chemical C8 that's been used, was historically used in Teflon, as well as other coatings to create water repellents or resistance or nonstick cookware, things of that kind. And the reason I want to go back and visit is I've never had more questions or people telling me about their stories following a show. Just had a lot of people reach out. And one of the things that was pointed out to me, and I think I sort of knew about this in the back of my mind, but I had forgotten about it, was there's a movie that's just been recently presented at a film festival called The Devil We Know. And so for any of our listeners, and maybe you can even mention this towards the end of the show notes, you can go to thedevilweknow.com and you can see information about this subject matter, about this movie. And it's really one of those things, it's one of these untold stories that unfortunately is affecting millions of people's lives. And I'm not just talking about in the US, I'm talking about really all over the world. This is an issue. And so sometimes these chemicals, from a category standpoint, I didn't really dive into this deep enough last week, is they're called PASFs or polyfluoroalkyls. I mean, you often will just see them called polys or whatever happens to be, but they're very disruptive to the function of the body. We mentioned that last week, that it can disrupt the function of the immune system and impact the DNA. It can be an endocrine disruptor, right? So your endocrine systems, most of the time people generally think of that as controlling your blood sugars, but endocrine system also can play a role in function of hormones and other things. And there's just all these issues that occur when these systems are out of whack, whether it's thyroid problems, your vulnerability to cancer essentially goes up dramatically. I know we talked a little bit about it, but testicular, pancreatic cancer, liver cancer. And so a lot of this movie is about a town in West Virginia where it was being produced and a spill took place in a river, and it basically got into the water supply of the town. And it's an interesting dynamic. And I think you talked about this last week, in that a lot of people want to use the Teflon coated cookware, right? It's super convenient and it's sold everywhere. And I mean, frankly, if you look at that cookware, it's most of the time a lot less expensive than, say, stainless steel cookwares that are less risky from this kind of standpoint. And that town faced one of those very similar dilemmas in that a lot of people were employed by this chemical company that had the spill, taking action against them and would essentially threaten their jobs and sort of the lifeblood of this community. Yet these chemicals, just as I said, can raise risk of cancer and all kinds of other things. And so for us as human beings, if you look at the statistics and the facts out there, there's some 80,000 chemicals, almost all of which, or I should say maybe very few we know a whole lot about from a health standpoint, that are out there and are very disruptive to our bodies, as tough as sometimes I think human beings think we are, because we survive a fall or we mend from a broken bone or whatever it happens to be. We're pretty fragile beings. We just happen to have really good brains, right, to kind of help us survive, but we're pretty fragile beings and we're exposed to these things. And so this class of chemicals goes well beyond the C8 that we were talking about that both Dow and DuPont were producing, no longer produce, but the companion chemicals that now essentially perform the same thing, we don't know if their impact is going to be the same. That's part of the challenge, is that the system allows this reintroduction of chemicals without really knowing a whole lot about it. And so one of the primary questions I was asked about was, can you talk specifically about where these chemicals are found? And I think I mentioned a little bit of it. So I've got a little list here, if I can, just to kind of bring to everybody's attention. So the cookware we talked about, quite common. Almost anything from a utensil standpoint, or tools you use in your kitchen, or pots and pans that are non-stick, whether it's Teflon brand or not, are going to have these polychemicals in them. And so, at least for me, my choice is just simply not to use them. I would rather use an iron skillet. In fact, that's the favorite thing we use in our home, is a good quality iron skillet, because the iron actually leaches into the food, which can be a positive source of iron, and not so much that it would be a danger. And so iron skillets are a great thing to cook in. Just want to make sure you've got a good quality iron skillet. But anything that's nonstick is going to have these chemicals. And so consider a good olive oil or avocado oil or some kind of vegetable-based oil that has not been treated or using like a partial hydrogenated compound in it or anything of that kind. So that's the first thing. The second one is in your drinking water. And so again, I probably again sound like a broken record, but I encourage people to try to think about your water supply, where it's coming from, how clean it is. If you're drinking from a spring or you've got a well system, has it ever been tested, right? Has it been tested for chemicals that can leach into the ground? In North Carolina, where we live, we have really a quite similar situation where a chemical processing plant was releasing into a river system some of the excess and the waste from the chemicals they were producing. And it turns out some of those chemicals were not friendly to human beings, right? And it made it into those river supplies in such a way that it made its way into the fish that people were catching and eating, and into the ground supply of water. And so people within even multiple miles, 20, 30 miles of this facility, were finding high levels of these chemicals in their well water. So the water supply is pretty critical to think about, but places where it's less obvious are things like food packaging. Because when food manufacturers, and I'll segue to say this is another reason why I discourage people from eating so much ultra-processed food or packaged food. These food manufacturers, they don't want to put a plastic wrap on a freshly prepared meal or food and have it stick to the food, right? Consumers won't like that. If you go to a fast food restaurant and you're buying something that they, handing through a drive-through window or whatever happens to be, you don't want the packaging to stick to your food. And so they use non-stick chemicals in packaging. In fact, Whole Foods grocery chain here in the U.S. that generally considered a place where you would buy healthy foods just had a real issue because the takeout food trays and containers that they were offering to consumers for pre-prepared meals actually had these chemicals in them that are in the same class or family that we've been describing. So food packaging is something we can all choose to really take a close look at. I know that when we, have leftovers from a meal standpoint, if the leftover containers won't completely hold it, or we got to put something over top of it, we'll use tin foil because that won't leach into the food. I'm very leery of plasticwares, plastic wraps, and certainly discourage people from heating things up in a microwave using those kinds of containers, because it, again, will leach into the food. But then also clothing. And so children's clothing, which is often treated with flame retardant chemicals, these are from the very same class. And so you want to look at the labels and pay attention to what it says about that clothing, how they're treated, home goods. And so this is one of those places will maybe surprise a lot of people. But if you buy a piece of furniture and bring it into your home, highly likely that not only is it treated with formaldehyde to help preserve the color in the fabric, a lot of times to make it stain resistant, it's been sprayed with Teflon-like chemicals in this very same class. And then the final thing to mention is cosmetics. And so it is really important to pay attention to who you buy your cosmetics from. And for the ladies out there that, you enjoy your cosmetics, you're probably using the same brand for a long period of time, right? People tend to be very loyal with personal care products. So if you're doing that, then take the time to go to that company's website and look at their ingredients and see if they have a position on the types of chemicals they use for preservatives. People don't think about it, but for body lotions or soaps or all of these things, they have preservatives in them to extend the shelf life. And so paying attention to this, particularly if it's your colors, so your mascaras, your rouge, things of this kind, they want to preserve those colors for long periods of time. Oftentimes a heck of a lot of chemicals are used. And so if you've got your favorite brand, then go to their website and look for some answers about what kind of preservatives and other chemicals they're using in there, because you don't want to give yourself that exposure, right? That's directly applying it to the skin. And for men, maybe some men wear cosmetics and some don't, but almost everyone's using deodorants, right? This is another place to really pay attention to, what kind of chemicals are used there. So I thought I would just sort of go back and revisit that and reiterate, and let me say it one more time for those that are curious about the details. And I know a lot of your audience is very curious and they're serious about making a difference in their lives. Go to the website, thedevil-we-know.com, and educate yourself on the subject matter, because one of the best defenses you can have is to educate yourself on what you and your family are consuming or using in your home that could potentially be polluting you. So I don't know if you have any follow-up or you received some questions from there, but that was one of the main things that we really had from last week.
Life is complicated, and how to live life.
Life is complicated.
Details.
But I don't think we just throw our hands up, right? I mean, it is easy to throw your hands up. I think I probably mentioned it before. There's a singer-songwriter named Joe Jackson in the 1980s wrote a song that everything gives you cancer. And it's real easy to sort of say to yourself, the heck with it. Everything gives you cancer. But I think we're better than that, right? I think we can pay attention. I'm not naive. I know we can't eliminate all of these things from our life, and that's okay, but we don't have to be complicit and increase exposure. We can at least do a little bit to try to make a difference. So, and if anybody's got any additional questions, I'm certainly happy to continue to dive into it, but hopefully this gives everybody just a little more detail, and looking at that website will definitely give them some additional education. So let's go back and finish up on Lyme disease,
okay,
which is not a sexy subject, right? So we need to find some more positive subjects, Harry, to talk about here. So as I mentioned, Lyme disease is the result of somebody receiving a tick bite from an infected tick. And this is sort of what we know about it. And you and I had talked even before the show began about, gosh, why does it seem like this is happening more frequently? And I don't know if it's because urban development is disturbing the natural living environment of these ticks, or it's because the animals that sometimes these ticks can ride on, such as deer, are now in urban areas because we've shrunk down their natural living environment. I don't know what those issues are, but the reality is that as I mentioned earlier, over 400,000 diagnosed cases last year for Lyme disease in the U.S. And that doesn't mean that's the limit, because as I said earlier, so many times flu-like symptoms, it's very difficult for the physician to really know exactly what's going on until it can be not just months, but it can be years later before somebody actually gets a proper diagnosis. And so here's the symptoms that people can have. Headaches, and what a person would think about is, are they chronic? Are they repeated? Sometimes headaches can come because a person's dehydrated, and as soon as they drink some water, it goes away, or maybe it took too long to eat, or maybe they had too much to drink the night before, or whatever it happens to be. But if you've got a chronic continuing sets of headaches, that's something to pay attention to and look more deeply into. Muscle aches. So again, this is a lot like a flu symptom, but chronic muscle aches that don't go away, right, and aren't accompanied by a cough or the sniffles. And so if a person's got headaches, if they have muscle aches, but they don't necessarily have the sinus issues you would associate with the flu or a cold, they probably need to really look into, hey, am I dealing with a Lyme disease like issue? And then fatigue. Sometimes Lyme disease is confused with chronic fatigue syndrome because these symptoms can cross over and look very similar. They're separate viruses, but they can look similar. But if you're dealing with the headaches, the muscle aches and pains, then the fatigue, and then finally joint pain, and then the final one to look for is constipation. That's not often associated with the flu, and so that can be. In fact, with the flu, a lot of people are dealing with a loose stool, and sort of the opposite end of the spectrum from being constipated. And so a way to sort of realize, hey, I've got something here that perhaps is more serious than the flu, is to make note, are they dealing with these symptoms, but also in accompanying to that, they have constipation. And so I encourage people at that point, go see their physician, let them know what's going on, share with them what their concerns are so they can get the proper attention to get ahead of the diagnosis instead of allowing the Lyme's to embed itself and become so difficult, because they can treat Lyme's with heavy dosages of antibiotics. However, that's not a complete solution a lot of the time. And so they've got other issues. And then the final thing here is that, and this is sort of one of those consequences, right? Have you ever heard of the term unintended consequences?
No.
So basically where something happens and causes something else to happen nobody saw coming, right? It's kind of unintended. And in this case, not that anything to associate with Lyme disease is intentional, but when a person has Lyme disease, it, to put it in simple terms, sort of shuts off their ability to deal with toxins. It closes down those pathways and makes the body, for lack of a better way to say it, very inefficient at disposing of toxins a person's exposed to. So before Lyme disease, you might have been exposed to heavy metals, environmental pollutants, cadmium, from cigarette smoke or exhaust emissions, things like this, and it not really be an issue for you because your body processed toxins out of it with its normal pathways and systems quite easily. However, when a person gets Lyme's, very often the body's detoxification pathways actually shut down. And so now that Lyme disease becomes exacerbated by a buildup of heavy metals and volatile organics. They literally become toxic because their body systems that normally would have dealt with the toxins shuts down. And so this is where the Lyme's becomes complicated and more complicated over time, because it's not just those acute symptoms of the headache, the muscle fatigue, the joint pain, the constipation. It's that now they're not processing toxins out like they used to. So, and this will bring puzzles to the doctor, right? So I encourage people always take your health seriously, educate yourself so that you're prepared when you go to see a medical professional to ask some questions. You may have some things going on they don't know about. And so it's really important for you to be able to express yourself and share what your concerns are. There may be no problem and no reason to be concerned, but you don't know that. And so you got to educate yourself. And then what I tell everyone, and this is going to be a consistent bit of advice, if you think you're dealing with Lyme's beyond just seeing the doctor, man, pay attention to your diet. A healthy diet pushing yourself away from the ultra processed foods, drinking soft drinks, eating sugary desserts and things of this kind. You don't need that. That creates an additional body burden that your body's not in good shape to manage. And so what I encourage people to do that have Lyme's is to focus on an anti-inflammatory diet, because one of the things that Lyme is doing, and where the pain is coming from, the joint pain and muscle issues, is coming from inflammation that's being created by your immune system trying to battle this really significant issue, virus, disease. And so an anti-inflammatory diet, and then rest. That can be a challenge because people that are suffering often don't rest well, but a healthy anti-inflammatory diet, plenty of water and rest. And then finally, boy, if there's ever been a situation where the zeolite is critical to use, someone that's battling a virus issue like this, whether it's chronic fatigue or something associated with Lyme's, get yourself a good zeolite product and use it on a regular basis, because with Lyme's, those normal detoxifying pathways essentially don't work as well as they used to. And so you need to do everything you can to help support the body in that detoxification. I think the research is outstanding on how the zeolite can help to bind with heavy metals, environmental pollutants, and help carry them out of the system. I believe we have the best zeolite in the marketplace. But frankly, if you can't get ours or you don't like ours, go find a good one and use it, because you need to support your body in detoxification. And that will help out with the symptoms and help the body fight the disease. So that's what because of some questions earlier the last several weeks that I wasn't able to get to. I know for some of our listeners, I've got several questions in the queue. We've got an avid listener that wants us to spend some time talking about the healthy benefits of tree nuts. And so we're going to do that in one of our upcoming shows here in a couple of weeks. And so, but I know the Lyme's keeps coming up for folks, and thought we'd try to give them more education, right, to support their decisions and what they're doing to create a better, healthy environment.
Eddie, sorry, can Lyme disease really be cured?
Well, there are people that are living symptom-free. Does that mean that there's no residuals whatsoever in their body? You know, I'm not an epidemiologist, and so I'm not prepared to answer that. But you know, for a lot of people that are out there, and because of their diet, probably because of the medical treatment they've received, the detoxification they're doing, whatever it is, they're living symptom-free, and that's a beginning point. And it's almost like when someone's had cancer and they don't have cancer symptoms any longer, they say they're in remission, because I think there's a real hesitancy to say that the body's free of it and clear forever. And I can understand that. I mean, Lyme's is a difficult virus. And so I think for most people, probably living symptom-free, and probably after a long enough period of time of being symptom-free, their physician might say, hey, you're cured, or you have no Lyme's disease to deal with. So I don't know how we would firmly say that, Perry, but I think if you're living symptom-free, you can be excited about that.
I'm just curious. Any people who have Lyme disease, most of them, they live in the city or they live in the country? You have any ideas?
I think Lyme's is more prevalent in rural areas, just simply because those folks are more likely to be in contact with or exposed to ticks that are infected and carry the disease. And so I think probably most definitely we would think of rural areas being a higher percentage of the population dealing with the issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Eddie. Thank you for today.
Thank you, Perry. We need to find us a more lighter subject to talk about. Maybe we'll talk about some New Year's resolutions next week, and that'll help us lighten up our conversations. But thank you so much for the privilege to be on the show and share this information. For those that are reaching out and communicating with your concerns, hey, we love hearing from you, and happy to try to help you sort of navigate this difficult environment of trying to live your best life, a healthy life.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, see you again next week. Okay, Eddie.
Bye, Perry. Bye-bye now.
Bye.